Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke the Human. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good. As per usual, today we're going to get super nerdy hardcore. Some of you might remember, depending on when I release this episode, that maybe a month ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I wrote on Twitter that I was looking into a super nerdy hardcore sort of genre topic that I couldn't talk about, and that this was a topic that unless you was a super fan of this certain thing, or if you were really sort of into old-fashioned pop culture and that sort of thing, you might not even know these things exist. And it's new. That I haven't seen anybody in the podcasting space done it, and I haven't really seen anybody in the Doctor Who podcasting space cover this at all either. So today I'm going to be talking about the 1965 movie Doctor Who and the Daleks, starring Peter Cushing. I've never watched this movie, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it. But before we get into that, before we get into all the fun stuff, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping. Make sure that you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod to be kept up to date on anything that I am doing. Also, make sure to follow me on YouTube, or subscribe to me on YouTube at the Nerdstalgic Podcast. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that things. If you're already listening to this episode, it helps me out immensely. All likes help, all comments help, and obviously subscribes help so much more as well. So, that is today's topic. I'm going to be talking about the Peter Cushing Doctor Who movie. I'm really excited for this one. It's going to be so much fun. As you all know, I have a deep love for Doctor Who. I love it. I've read the comic books. I read the books themselves. I've covered a few of the books here on the podcast. I've covered the sort of 9th Doctor's era. I'm currently working my way through the 10th Doctor's era, and I'm going to cover that one. And I'm going to do Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi. And we'll do the 13th Doctor, the 14th Doctor when the 60th anniversary comes out, and then eventually Shutagawa. And then we're just going to keep going. But I also want to look at the older sort of Doctors as well. So there is going to be a lot of back and forth with this. So I decided to go back to the actual movie because I haven't got any of the original episodes. I was looking into getting the box sets because Doctor Who, what they're doing recently at the BBC, they're releasing periodically each year a season of the original classic Doctor Who episodes. So you can get the box set. There's loads out. I think the latest one coming out soon is one of the 5th Doctor's one. I can't remember what season it is, but his one's coming out this year, I think soon. So I was looking into getting those, but they're really expensive. So I figured where else to start would be with sort of the movies with Peter Cushing. As you know, because I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I've only seen a few classic Doctor Who episodes, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. You know, this episode is not just going to be look at the movie, but it's just going to allow me to kind of really gush over my love of Doctor Who. So be ready for that. There's going to be ready for a lot of gushing. More gushing than I do normally. I'm going to gush completely here, all over yous. That sounds disgusting. I do apologise. Moving on swiftly, quickly. But yeah, I've only seen a few of the older original sort of Doctor Who episodes. Mostly all sort of Tom Baker. I grew up with a lot of Tom Baker's era. Still haven't watched all of Tom Baker's episodes. There's still a lot of seasons and episodes I haven't seen. Like the Pirate Planet, seen that, or the City of Death, which was a really good one. Fascinating. I've even read the book to it, which is incredible. But Tom Baker is my favourite of the classic Doctors. But that is sort of as far as I've gone. I've seen a few of Colin Baker. I've seen a few of Vesta McCoy. You know, I've seen a few bit of Peter Davison, but mostly it has been Tom Baker. He is my favourite classic Doctor because of that, because he was the original that I watched. Because my first introduction, and I've said this before, but just to rehash it here, my first introduction to Doctor Who was the 2005 when the show sort of came back. with Chris Eccleston. Before then, I didn't know what Doctor Who was. I thought it was a brand new thing. I didn't realize it was this sort of old classic sort of series that had been revived. Didn't know any of that. I was only a young beam. And then I remember because the new sort of revival series did well. I think the Sun newspaper, if you bought a Sun newspaper, you'd get a free DVD of a classic episode from the original Doctor Who. My granddad always never missed an issue of the Sun. Every day he would have a new issue of the Sun, right? So he'd collect all these sort of DVDs for me, and it would be, you'd have a bit of the Third Doctor, a bit of the fourth, fifth, sixth. There would be a bit of all of them. But my granddad, again, he liked the original Doctor Who as well, and he liked Tom Baker, so he mostly just collected the Tom Baker ones. He gave me the other ones as well, but he had a good collection of the Tom Baker ones that they gave out. So those are the ones that I watched the most of because I just enjoyed him more because he was like, well, we all know what Tom Baker's like. He is personically the Doctor. I'm not here to talk about and gush over Tom Baker, but it's just me to kind of way that I can gush over Doctor Who in general to show how much I love it. But yeah, that was kind of where I started with the classics, and that's kind of where it's ended, really. For me, in terms of classics, the only way I've managed to go back to sort of the classics is with Big Finish. Now, one thing that I want to get into is kind of where this idea came from. Actually, go back to the original movies, and the reason why I started with the Peter Cushing movie and not with Paul McGann's film. So the reason I decided to go back and watch this movie was because of Big Finish. If you don't know what Big Finish is a audio sort of adventure sort of production. And they mostly do sort of Doctor Who, but they do the likes of like Blake Seven. They do things like the Christmas Carol. They do Touchwood. They do. I'm trying to think what else they do. It's like a Sherlock Holmes Lightfoot, I think it is, sort of thing. It's like it's part of the Doctor Who universe, but it's like its own sort of sub series. I think they did Sarah Jane. They're recently doing Sarah Jane now. They do loads. It's mostly all Doctor Who, but it's around that sort of audio adventures, and I love them. I've listened to loads. If you haven't listened to any Doctor Who Big Finish episodes, I highly recommend them. If you have a Spotify account, right, it's between us beans, right? This is some secret information I'm about to give you here. But if you have a Spotify account, premium or not, there are ways around it if you don't have premium, but it's free. So if you have a Spotify account, just type in Doctor Who Big Finish, and you can listen to the first 50 monthly Doctor Who Big Finish episodes. Highly recommend it. Check into it. It's incredible, and that's how I've been listening to them. The reason I bring that up is because as well as reading the books, I have listened to a few Big Finish episodes here and there whenever they release free ones, because sometimes Big Finish they will release free episodes, mainly short adventures, that sort of thing. But when I discovered that they're on Spotify, I was slowly going through them. They're only like an hour to 2 hour long. They're not long adventures. They won't take a big chunk of your time out. And maybe in the future I will talk about Big Finish a lot more. Once I've listened to more of it, maybe I'll do like a top 10 or top 50 of favorite episodes. But what I started listening to is sort of the monthly range, and this is kind of the beginning from like 1999. With each month they would release a new episode. Now I don't know anything about Big Finish, so if I'm wrong here, please, if you're a super fan, don't kill me. I'm new to Big Finish, and to be honest, there's so much to it. It's going to take me a long time to get through all of it, really, if I ever do, because there is years and years and years of it. But they did a monthly range starting from like 1999 I don't know how far they got to be honest. I'm on Goodreads at the moment. I'm trying to go down to what their most recent one, which is book 100, and that last was published Doctor Who 100. That was in 2007. But it was by each month they would do it. I managed to get through the first 15 books until I got to Doctor Who Storm Warning, which it features Paul McGann's Doctor, and I basically realised I can't go on because I haven't watched the Paul McGann movie. I've always wanted to watch it. I've said for years that I would sit down and watch the Doctor Who movie with Paul McGann. Um, haven't, and it's a shame because Paul McGann is an incredible actor. He's an incredible talent, and it does pain me that he hasn't really had his chance to really shine as the Doctor. He has a Big Finish. If you listen to any of the Big Finish episodes, which I have listened to a few here and there, I listened to one where he had, I think it was Mary Shelley. He had her as a companion, and they had an adventure called, I think it was called the Silver Turk, and it was incredibly dark and gritty and spooky episode where they basically go to this, without trying to spoilers, they go to this sort of carnival and they find this sort of man robot thing, and instantly the Doctor knows what it is, but to everybody else it's really um what kind of like revolutionary but spooky. Don't want to really spoil what the reveal is of what this creature, monster, sort of robot thing is. But you can probably guess maybe by the word robot what it is. I won't go spoilers, but yeah, he has Mary Shelley as a companion. It's an incredible little sub series. I do highly recommend checking it out. I haven't finished it yet. I think I've got one or two that I've got to listen to. But definitely check those out. But Paul McGann has done loads. Like, so if you ever want to learn more about Paul McGann, definitely check out, Big Finish for that. But I realised once I got to Storm Warning that I haven't watched the movie. So I looked into looking at buying the movie. It's cheap. I was going to buy the Blu-ray. And then, as in my research, I realised that they were other Doctor Who movies from 1965 and 1966 with Peter Cushing. I mean, if you are a big fan of cinema, you know who Peter Cushing is. I was floored. I was like, I did not know that Peter Cushing played the Doctor. I did not know these movies existed. It felt like, it feels like whenever you are a fan of a topical series, and then you realise that there is something in that series that you thought you knew everything about, and then you realise you just learned something brand new, and you was like, oh my god, how did I not know this? That's how I felt. I was like, there are movies from the 60s with Peter Cushing. How do I not know this? Peter Cushing is an incredible, monumental actor. Yeah, he's one of my favourite actors from Star Wars. So how is it that I didn't know? So I decided to go online and to buy the Studio Canal edition of the Doctor Who movie, and that's kind of where this sort of journey began, really. It sounds a bit crazy, and I've kind of hodgepodged the story a bit, but that's where it began, really. That I was listening to Big Finish. I wanted to go on with the Paul McGann sort of stories. Realized I really just need to watch the Paul McGann movie before I move on, because his voice is like he's incredible at audio. Like, he's not just a fantastic talent, but he has such a great voice for radio, such a great voice for audiobooks and audio adventures, that it's like super. It's like, but I think I've mentioned this before, but his voice, you just fall in love with him. And then it pains me that this guy hasn't had the opportunity to be the Doctor more, and I really, really hope. I've heard rumblings that maybe Russell T Davies was thinking about bringing Paul McGann back for his own sort of mini series, like kind of like they did with Sarah Jane Adventures, but like the Paul McGann adventures, like the adventures that we didn't get to see. Like Big Finish, like I said, they've done a fantastic job of really continuing his story, continuing his legacy, and to be honest, he's had tons and tons of adventures. Paul McGann has, but I want to see him on the screen. We had that short film, which was like the War Doctor, with him turning into John Hurt's War Doctor. But I wanted to generally see him, before the Time War, during the Time War, and then up into the events of where he decides that he's not the man that needs to be for this sort of event, what's happening to his people, so he needs to change to a more ruthless, to basically a War Doctor, which he does, John Hurt, and John Hurt does a fantastic job. And that's basically where it began, and I realised that these movies existed. So that is why I am going to be looking at something that's incredibly super nerdy. I didn't know it really existed till quite recently. This is not something that I've seen other. I'm sure they have done, but I haven't seen many sort of Doctor Who YouTube accounts or even Doctor Who podcasts talk about it. I haven't seen many podcasts talk about it. And I just want to briefly mention here that I've decided to do a bit of a change with my style, with my podcast and the content I look at. What I've always done with my podcast is that any topic that I talk about is something that I want to talk about, something that I love, and that's stuff that I'm interested in. And then hopefully people that listen are also interested as well. But I've decided to change it a bit more, that I want to look more into older things, older TV shows, older movies, older nostalgia things. I don't want to look at things that everybody else is looking at. You're not saying that, for example, I won't look at Starship Troopers or Ghostbusters, but everybody talks about them. And I feel like if everybody talks about them, it's not as fun, it's not as interesting. So I would like to do those sparingly here and there, but mostly look at the older things that other people aren't talking about, fun things, interesting things that kind of like, for example, the Bioshock book, Rapture. Not really anybody's talking about that. Nobody really knew it existed. I introduced it to a lot of people, and I've had a lot of people get back to me and say, I didn't know that book existed. You interested me. I've now gone out and bought the book, and I'm now reading the book. I've had a few people message me say that, and as not just as a podcaster, but just as a fan, that makes me smile to know that I've turned people's sort of eyes to something that they didn't know existed. And that's kind of what I want to do now with going forwards with the podcast and with episodes, is to really look at things that aren't really talked about a lot, that are not really well known, and kind of push people towards them to see if something that they would like in a sort of not forceful, like you need to watch this, you need to play this. More so just the fact of, this is something that I enjoy, it's something cold, it's something that we not really talked about, not really loved, but I wanted to talk about it because I have love and enjoyment in it, So that's kind of where the podcast is starting to go forward. So I just wanted to mention that here, instead of doing like a separate update elsewhere. But so that's I'm just going through my notes. So that's the idea side of it. One thing I do want to briefly sort of mention before we move on to the actual talking about the production and the actual topic of today, I do want to mention the original first ever episode of Doctor Who, which was The Unearthly Child, which aired first broadcast on the 23rd of November 1963. The reason I mention that is because I originally in my research thought that the movie with Peter Cushing came first, and that was the inspiration for the show. Turns out, actually, the show came first in 1963, and that the movie came later, which I will get into in a minute shortly. But I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was the way around. So I find it quite fascinating. Obviously, the first Doctor, William Hartnell, which he's incredible talent himself. I've only seen 1 to 2 episodes of William Hartnell. I think it was actually the Marco Polo episodes, but even then, only parts, because I think, I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into it. I think some of those episodes are missing, so I've only seen a few parts here and there, what has been recovered on YouTube and the like. But William Hartnell, fantastic Doctor. I would like to experience him a lot more. Maybe like in the future, if I have the opportunity and have the chance, I do want to go back and watch a lot of the older Doctor Who episodes, and maybe kind of like what I do with the other Doctors, but more condensed. It would be, instead of just doing a bi-season thing, just do it as a sort of overall. So instead of like, I'm going to do a bi-season of each of 10 seasons and each of 11 seasons, and show how he grows, I was just gonna, because these episodes are so long and there's so many episodes, I would just do it as the Hartnell era, the sort of Baker era, the Tom Baker era, the Colin Baker era, the Troughton era, and that sort of thing. So maybe that would be something that I look into in the future. But I wanted to mention this because I thought it was really, really interesting. I didn't notice that before. As for the actual topic of today, because we need to get into it, because I could sit here and talk about Doctor Who all day, every day, obviously. But we're here to talk about the Doctor Who and the Daleks. So, moving on sort of swiftly. So, Doctor Who and the Daleks is a 1965 British science fiction film directed by Gordon Fleming and written by Milton Subsky. Subotsky, and the first of two films based on the British science fiction television series Doctor Who. It stars Peter Cushing as Doctor Who, Roberta Tovey as Susan, Jenny Linden as Barbara, and Roy Castle as Ian. It was followed by Daleks' invasion of Earth in 2150 AD in 1966. The story is based on the Doctor Who television serial The Daleks, produced by the BBC, filmed in Technicolor. It is the first Doctor Who story to be made in colour and in a widescreen format. The film was not intended to form part of the ongoing storylines of the television series. Elements from the programme are used, however, such as various characters, the Daleks, and a police box time machine, albeit in a reimagined format. So that is kind of give you an introduction to it. As the production, so Amicus bought an option to make the story and two sequels from Terry Nation and the BBC for £500. Principal photography commenced at Shepperton Studios in England in April 1965 and took 6 weeks to film. The film was produced on a budget of £180,000, equivalent to dyspraxia is coming in. Dyscalculia is coming in strong here. Equivalent to £3,563,087 in today's money. The Daleks were redesigned slightly for the film. They had larger base sections and dome lights than the TV Daleks of the time, making them more imposing, and some were fitted with a two-jawed mechanical claw instead of a plunger. They also had more colourful paint schemes, with two Dalek leaders being painted respectively in black and red. Originally, the Daleks were to be armed with flamethrowers, but these were vetoed on health and safety grounds, which is surprising because back in the 60s there wasn't much in the way of health and safety, really. Not to today's standards anyway. Like, people did get hurt on the original Doctor Who. I think Sarah Jane, she almost died a few times. The lady that played her almost died a couple of times, actually. I think it was they was in a quarry and there was an explosion and it went off a bit early and I think it almost got her. Yeah, so talk about health and safety is quite surprising considering that the show wasn't very health and safety at all. Anyway, due to health and safety grounds, and because they were considered too frightening for a young audience, instead the guns projected jets of CO2 gas from internally mounted fire extinguishers. The actor Barry Ingram discussed the production in an interview in Australia in 1976 for the Doctor Who fanzine Zanara. In 1995, a documentary about the two Dalek films, Dalek Mania, was released on video. It revealed details about the productions, spin-offs, and publicity campaigns. It was later included as an extra in many of the home media video releases of the two Dalek films. Although the planet on which the action takes place is not named in the film, it is retroactively identified as Skaro in the sequel, matching the name given in the television series. As for marketing, as part of the promotional campaign, a number of Daleks were displayed at the 1965 Cannes Film Festival. Single Daleks were also sent further afield, one making an appearance at a cinema in Sydney, Australia. Souvenir Press published a tie-in colouring book for children in 1965 with colour photographic illustrations from the film on both of the front and rear covers. As for the critical response, Film Guide described the film as limply put together and only for indulgent children. John Clute, in the book Science Fiction, the Illustrated Encyclopedia, gives the film 1 star out of 3, stating, many people would like to see the Doctor Who television series back. Few mourn the long-gone films. Radio Times was more favourable, awarding the film 3 stars out of 5, commenting, this spin-off lacks the bite and inventiveness that set the landmark series apart, unwisely injecting humour into the space scenario, and the cheap art direction is strictly one-to-one uses for pink plastic sheeting. However, despite the many faults, it's still a fun ride for both the uninitiated and die-hard fans alike. That part there when he mentions cheap and plasticky, well, duh. Anybody who's watched any of the old classic Doctor Who, they knew it was clunky. That's one of the joys of original Doctor Who, especially for modern fans, is how clunky and plasticky and cheap everything is. Doctor Who was ran on a shoestring budget. It hasn't got the budget it has got today. It was ran on a shoestring. You know, they needed to cut corners, and yes, sometimes it was noticeable, but you'd be surprised what you can do on a short budget and how sort of ingenious and how sort of clever you have to be in trying to stretch that budget as far as possible. And it's made for some of the best Doctor Who episodes. Some of the best looking were done cheaply, but are still relatively good and admired because you have to compensate for that, and they compensated fantastically for that. So yes, maybe it looks cheap, but that's the joy of a lot of fans, and that's just the way the original Doctor Who shows were cheap. Moving on anyway. In the Guardian in 2013, Stuart Heritage, whatever, stated. Cushing does his best, but he's not exactly given a lot to work with. He described the Daleks as so pointlessly toothless here, and also criticised the incredibly tedious amount of Dalek dialogue to explain their motives. The portrayal of the Trials and Roy Castle's performance, saying to call him Hammy would be to provide the greatest disservice to pigs. Andrew Nell, that's a bit harsh actually, Andrew Nell of the British Film Institute stated the film was widely derailed by many fans and critics, adding it is certainly an uneven affair. Some scenes still have the capacity to thrill. Others, like the final victory of the Daleks, feel rushed and flat. The Doctor's granddaughters are largely one-dimensional. The aspect of the movie that most antagonizes purists is Cushing's Doctor. Nettle described the film as having a wonderfully pulpy science fiction atmosphere, saying the highlight of the movie is its looks, and many of the sets are impressive, and the movie Daleks are more impressive than their small screen counterparts. According to the BFI, the Cushing films are often forgotten in the Doctor Who pantheon, which they are. I didn't know that they existed myself. Similarly, Stuart Heritage commented in The Guardian 2013 that people don't talk about Doctor Who and the Daleks anymore. In 1975, actor Tom Baker, who was playing the Fourth Doctor in the television series at the time, commented on the flaws of the film and its sequel while discussing another proposed Doctor Who film, saying that there have been 2 Doctor Who films in the past, both rather poor. There are many dangers in transporting a television series onto the big screen. A lot of things that you could get away with on the small screen wouldn't wash in the cinema. Actually, a bit of trivia here for you. Tom Baker did actually write a script for another Doctor Who movie, but it was never picked up. No one ever sort of decided to go with it, and that he ended up a couple of years later. Actually, say a couple of years later, a couple of years back, he wrote a book called The Scratchman, Doctor Who the Scratchman, and that book I haven't read it yet, mainly because I want to read it, but I've heard it's really, really good, and it kind of ends off the Fourth Doctor almost perfectly, really. It's either Tom Baker's love letter to the Doctor, but also it's a nice sort of sign off to the Fourth Doctor as well. So in my internal monologue, in my internal sort of headcanon, what I've decided to do is that I'm going to watch all the Fourth Doctor. Okay, this is going to be a while before I get around to this book if I do it this way, but this is how my brain works, so please bear with me. So I'm going to decide to watch all of the Fourth Doctor episodes, and then I'm going to put Big Finish to one side because there's so much Big Finish, and there's so much Fourth Doctor Big Finish episodes that I'm happy to put them to one side. So I'm going to cover all the Fourth Doctor episodes if I can. If any that are not longer existing or lost to time, because there's a lot of Doctor Who episodes that are just lost to time, mainly because back in the day in the BBC, nobody at the time really thought that this thing was going to catch on, that it was going to be as big, as popular as it is. And it was the same for any other show at the time. So what they would end up doing is that they would just put the canisters in storage, and some of them would be put, and they'd get in. What you need to know is about film. Like proper film, like old-fashioned film, is that it was very fragile. and that if you put it anywhere near that it was really, really hot, or water or anything like that, or just somewhere where it wasn't sort of pristinely sort of climated, which it wouldn't be, these films would just get eaten away by bacteria, and they would warp, and they just wouldn't work, and they would just be deteriorated. And a lot of these old sort of episodes that happened to them, or you would find a lot of these old episodes that they would just be copied over. That was like, oh, it's an old episode of Doctor. Ah, don't worry about it. We need the film, so they would just sort of copy over it. So you'd find a lot of the older episodes of Doctor Who are lost to time because of things like this. Where was I? I went on a tangent about old film. Anyway, no, I was talking about Tom Baker. Yes. Anyway, I'm kind of like Tom Baker myself. I'm very sporadic. Anyway, as I was talking about Tom Baker, I do apologise. I went on a big thing about film. He wrote a book called The Scratchman, and that is kind of his script of what he wanted to do as a movie. So I will get around to that eventually, and I will cover it. And eventually, when I do read it, I will review it here for all your listening pleasure. But yeah, that is sort of the critical response, and that's the production and what really went into this movie. It hasn't put me off at all, mainly because I am a fan of Doctor Who. I like the older Doctor Who, and I understand what Doctor Who was for the time. Yes, it was cheap. It was done on a shoestring budget, but that's what makes it fun, and that's what I used to enjoy. Like when I was young, all right, when I was first really discovering the older Doctor Who episodes, I was disheartened at first because they wasn't what I knew them to be, because of my first sort of when I first saw Doctor Who was with Christopher Eccleston, with a big budget, with modern cameras, with modern CGI and graphics and that sort of thing. It looks amazing for the time, but I slowly, as I watched them, I found I didn't watch them for the settings. I didn't watch them for the practical effects or how dated they looked. I watched them for the Doctor. I watched it for his companions. To watch a silly man with a long scarf run around and be silly and offer people jelly babies and to be fun and to be crazy, serious, I was there for the adventure, and I quickly just loved it for what it was just a silly group of people, silly group of doctors, all each in their own right, in their own personality, each one different, each one fun, doing their own thing, but having incredible adventures. So I didn't care if things looked stupid or cheap or silly, So I feel like there is a chance I'll watch this movie and I'll enjoy it for what it is, not for what I want it to be. And I feel like critics are really harsh, and critics are harsh on anything really. But to say that it looks cheap when you're talking about a movie from the 60s feels really sort of kind of lazy. It just feels lazy to me. Now, I haven't watched this movie, and my sentiments might be the same. I don't know. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm interested. I love Doctor Who. I've spent the last 32 minutes sitting here talking about my love of Doctor Who, which I've only just realised how long I've been talking. I do apologise. It's probably one of the longest introductions I've done in a very, very long time. But yeah, I'm going to stop talking now because I've just realised I've been talking for so long. I love Doctor Who. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're a hardcore Doctor Who fan as well, so you've appreciated all this just as much as I have. So, without further ado, I'm going to get my jelly babies, I'm going to get my long scarf on, I'm going to put my Doctor Who t-shirt on, and I'm going to sit and watch the 1965 classic movie, which I'm sure it is, with Peter Cushing, Doctor Who and the Daleks. Let's get into it, shall we? Right, so I've just finished watching Doctor Who and the Daleks, and honestly, I loved it. I knew I would. I'll be honest, I had no doubt that I would enjoy it. I had no doubt that I would have any sort of issue, or that I would even agree with any of the critics. It's not even the fact of the rose-tinted glasses or being a huge Doctor Who fan. I knew I would enjoy it because I like old movies anyway. I like the jank. I like the cheapness. I like the way that they were. Movies and cinema was back then. So I knew on that basis anyway that I would enjoy it. So again, I had no real doubt. But there was a little bit of a worry going into it, knowing the fact of, it is Doctor Who, and it's old Doctor Who. It's not anything modern, and this is the oldest any former Doctor Who that I've watched. And I was worried that I might not like the changes or how it being different or how it was originally and that sort of thing. That was my only real sort of worry. But as soon as it started, and as soon as I saw Peter Cushing just be Peter Cushing and be his version of the Doctor, I instantly fell in love. I fell in love with the how very 60s it is and how very groovy and everything's big, bright and technical and wonderful. You know, I just I fell in love with everything about it, which is kind of obvious. Um, the version I did watch, though, one thing I've got to admit, and I think this what helps with the version that I watched and what made it pop and what made it so gorgeous, today's standards anyway, is that the version I watched was a 4K Ultra HD version. Again, thanks to the people at Studio Canal, they released, which is the DVD version that I've got, a 4K Ultra HD version of this movie, as well as the second film as well. So it has been a brand new resolution. And one thing that you have with upscaling resolution, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you get the resolution, and because the quality of the image is better than it was, you can sometimes see the little issues, the little sort of uh, lack of better words, you get to look behind the curtain of the Oz, and you get to see. Sometimes you might see a wire that you didn't see before because it was old, bad quality, grainy, or you might see behind the sets, or you might be able to notice certain things and things like that. But here, if anything, it just bolsters what's there. It just makes it more, it makes everything pop more, it makes everything more colourful, makes everything a lot more detailed and beautiful. Like when, for example, when the Doctor and his companions find themselves in the petrified forest. It's you've got the greys pop, the greens pop, all the trees pop, and everything is just beautifully detailed. And again, it adds to the fact of yes, it was done on a shoestring budget. Doctor Who was, and I'm guessing I would imagine that the movie got a bit more budget than the show did. I don't know that for sure, but everything just pops and everything just looks good. So in the 4K resolution, you get to see all the extra detail, the extra texture, the extra technicolor, that gorgeousness of the 60s really comes to life on screen. And again, for that, I was floored. Especially for a movie from the 60s, it looks good. It looks really, really good. One thing I will say though, it doesn't look cheap. It literally looks like they had a budget. It actually looks like they tried, and it looks what you'd expect for a movie from the 60s, honestly. Um, I don't know what more the other sort of critics expected. It's a movie from the 60s. It's not going to be, flat screen TVs, phones, and the internet and stuff like that, because he didn't have that kind of stuff in the 60s. Let's be honest with us. Everything was practical. So you had to have the practical effects. You had to have you'd have little buttons and knobs and things like that that would blink. And if they was to do sci-fi, they would go to like you'd find a lot of movies if you're ever really interested in how movies are made. You watch any sort of documentary from movies back in the past, not even in the 60s, even like from the 90s, 80s, 70s. You'd find a lot of, and I'm probably sure today as well, you probably find that a lot of prop makers would go to charity shops or hardware stores and just buy things from there, and then they would retrofit them to make them look science fiction. Like, for example, the best example I can give, in Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, the communicators that they're using. So you ever see Qui-Gon Jinn talk to communicator, or Obi-Wan? Very futuristic, doesn't it? That was a lady shaver. I can't remember what it was, but that was a lady shaver. All they took the top off, took the blade out, and what the body of it that was left, they used and stylized to make it look like a communicator, because it looked futuristic anyway. But you don't know because the way they've done it. And that was the kind of way that they do things back in the day, was the fact of they tried their best with what they had. It looks very 60s. It looks very well. It doesn't look cheap at all. It looks like had a budget. And it's fun. It's an adventure. And like I do with everything else, I don't watch it for things of what I want it to be. I watch it for what it is, and I appreciate it for what it is. And I review it for what it is. I don't review it for what I wanted it to be. Now, yes, I might give my sort of thoughts and feelings near the end and be like, I wish they did this, I wish I did that. But I don't let that sort of negate what I actually got. I will say what I got and what I thought, And then I'll give my opinions of I wish they did this, I wish they did that. But I will still tell you if I enjoyed what it was for what it was, or if I didn't like it for what it was, you know? Um, so yeah, I disagree with it looking cheap. I don't think it looked cheap at all. Generally looked like a budget 60s movie, Technicolor, beautiful, grand, gorgeous, right? The set design for the TARDIS was incredible because again, the Doctor, he's not from Gallifrey. He is a human, and he's a scientist. And the way they designed it, it doesn't look like what you get like in the TV show, either the classic or the modern. It hasn't got the big column in the middle or the control panel, anything like that. When you first get inside the TARDIS, yes, it's bigger on the inside, and that's because of space and the way you can fit space and bend it and that sort of thing. Yeah, the TARDIS is still the TARDIS, but it doesn't look like the TARDIS on the inside. There's wires hanging all over the place. There's drawings and scribbles on the walls. There's bits of what's called like machinery here and there. There's scanners and there's tubes and wires, and it looks generally like he is a scientist. That's very very clever. Probably you could even say mad scientist. He made this in his back garden through parts that he got from like the hardware store and things like that. Um, and he just made it together with him and his granddaughter and his is it niece? Yeah, Barbara and Susan. It just looks like that's what he did. It looks like he just invented it himself, and it makes sense for the character and for the setting. So again, I enjoyed the workings of the TARDIS for what it is because it made sense in the story that it would look like that. It wouldn't make sense you'd have somebody who was, again, not saying he wasn't very very clever, and he probably couldn't, but he is just a very clever person who made a time machine in his back garden. I wouldn't expect it to look like a huge spaceship on the inside or like a really, really advanced. I would expect it to look a bit hodgepodge, but it works, and that's what matters. Yeah. Organized chaos is the best way I can explain it. The set design as well for Skaro is incredible. The way that the Daleks look, I love. They're bigger, bulkier. I even love the bit where they have little fire extinguishers as nozzles. I don't need the practical effects. I don't need the, I don't need any of that and the puff. I'm happy with a fire extinguisher because in the time of this, when this takes place, the Daleks are advanced, but they're not as advanced as we get to see them every other time we've seen them in the show, and we've seen them in the modern take of the show, as well as elsewhere. This is kind of like not the genesis of the Daleks, but kind of the beginning of the Daleks. Really before they start to advance. And you get it as well with the Cybermen when you first meet the Cybermen too. You see them like in the recent versions of the Cybermen, they're constantly upgrading and changing. So I didn't need the lights show or anything like that. I was happy with the fire extinguisher and how that works. That was fine with me. I liked the addition to the claws. That was fun. There was moments where a Dalek, like they actually use their extendable like amendments thing, amendments, armaments, whatever. The plungers extend, so that whenever they're having prisoners, they'd extend them so it would block the prisoner from walking. Like, don't move any further. It was very authoritarian. Like, do that, don't move. We'll bring it back. Move. There was one where they had the claw, and Ian was getting a bit brave, getting a bit hostile, and the Dalek literally didn't put it around his neck, but got close to kind of putting it around his neck, and that really shows what the Daleks are and who the Daleks are and how they act and treat other species. So that all really worked. So I like the design of that. Again, Skara looks incredible. I don't really know. I'll be honest. I haven't watched a lot of the classical episodes, as I said in the introduction, so I don't really know the story between the Thals and the Daleks. But from this, I was able to kind of see that like this Skaro, it's been destroyed by atomic war. All that's left are the Thals and the Daleks. And I'll get onto the story part of it in a minute. But the set design, again, it makes sense. You're in a petrified forest. Whenever you touch any of the trees, they fall to pieces like ash. They break away. That's beautiful. There's bits. There's greens. There's greys. They've got painted backgrounds, which again I've mentioned many times. I love a painted background in a live action or animated movie. I love it. There's painted backgrounds. There's the huge moon asteroid thing in the sky behind them, which looks gorgeous. And again, the 4K Ultra HD really helps. It makes everything just pop. It makes everything just go like, wow. Mwah, je ne sais quoi. I think just pow, 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 pow. Lovely. So everything about this thing is so 60s and so Doctor Who, but in a different way. I love it. I love it for that. Again, as for sort of the actors, Peter Cushing, he's fun. He's really fun and as incredible as the Doctor, because he's not the Doctor that we see. He's a Doctor that is full of joy and curiosity, but also odd, like the Doctor should be. He's an odd bloke. He's an odd fellow. He's weird. He's wonderful. He is human at the end of the day. And I'll expand on that in a minute later. But he is a fun version of the Doctor. But the Doctor in this, he doesn't do a lot because he's not a Gallifreyan. He's human. He cares about. Not saying our Doctor doesn't care about his companions, but he's just a clever man who happens to find himself in a situation, and he tries to find his best to get out of it by using his brain. Really, not knowing, he doesn't have the chance of regeneration or anything like that on his side. He's just being brave and being and clever and being curious and being fun, and he's just a joy. He's a real joy. So Peter Cushing, incredible. I'd love to see more of Peter Cushing. I really. I know we can't, but I'd love to see more of his Doctor. Like I say, he's a bit odd. Again, I'd love to see more of him and young Susan go on more adventures. They have a really great chemistry together, a really great dynamic between grandfather and granddaughter, because you can tell that she is his favourite. She's very clever for her age. There are many moments where she's very brave. She will go out and do things. She will take the lead, and the Doctor fully 100% follows her, like in this, like he's not holding her back, like, yeah, you're very brave, very clever, like go forth, go do your thing. Obviously in this, one thing I do want to mention, that he's actually not called Doctor. He's not called the Doctor like most people say, oh, the Doctor. In this, he actually uses the full name Doctor Who. That always made me think of, like, is his name, say, like, again, it's just a random name, but like Steve Who, Walter Who, that sort of thing. Is it Susan Who, Barbara Who, that sort of thing? Is it like a last name? But they all call him sort of Doctor Who. None of them call him Doctor. In my mind, I kept thinking, like, just call him Doctor. It would make it so much easier than saying just Doctor Who all the way through. But it's one of them things of, like, that meme when what's his name now, Leonardo DiCaprio, in the Tarantino movie, where he sees this thing and he goes, hey, he said the thing. That I was like, oh look, he said the word Doctor Who. So I had that little nerdy sort of little moment. I love it. But yeah, I love the dynamic between Peter Cushing, his Doctor, and Susan. Absolutely really great. Susan's very young at this point. It's not the older Susan that we see in the show. This is a very younger Susan. As for Ian, he moans a lot in this. For the first half hour of the story, he's just constantly moaning. He doesn't want to be there. Like, you'd think, like, I'm not saying everybody would, but if you got given the chance to go through time and through space and to be teleported to another planet, you wouldn't be a bit curious to go, you know what, I'd like to be at home, yes, but I'm on a new planet. Let's do a little bit of exploration, all right? Like, okay, 10, 20 minutes exploration, and let's go home. Straight away, like, I don't want to be here. I'm meant to be on a date with Barbara. I don't want to be here. I don't like this. Don't like that. Everything's an issue. Everything's moaning. We should have went back. We shouldn't have stayed here. Blah blah blah. I'm like, come on, Ian. He does eventually come into his stride and becomes a bit more brave and actually more proactive and stops moaning. But for the first half hour, he just moans all the way through. As for Barbara, she doesn't really do much. I watched the movie twice, as I do, even though you don't really need to. This is only an hour and 22-minute long film. It goes by very quickly. It's not a long sort of movie. But I watched it twice just to get all the little bits of details here and there I missed. And oddly enough, I didn't miss many details. But one detail that I did notice, was the reason why I wrote it down in the notes, is that Barbara, she don't really do much. She's not the damsel in distress. She's not the sort of again, Ian does all the moaning, so she's not the sort of the moaning character. Doesn't really help out a lot because Susan has that covered. So she's just kind of there, And I try to focus on what really Susan does. It's not a lot. I mean, not Susan. I mean, Susan. No, Susan does a lot. I mean, Barbara. Barbara doesn't do a lot, and I couldn't figure out as to why. She was just there. And it kind of makes sense because she comes into the TARDIS after the Doctor and Susan show Ian the TARDIS and he freaks out, it's like it's big on the inside and all this sort of moment that they have, which is quite cool. I like how they kept that back then, so it's not a modern thing. They still had it back then, which I love. But also, when Barbara comes in, she's like, "Oh, I knew you'd be in here," and then Ian falls backwards, falls onto the controller. Which, by the way, the controller to make the TARDIS actually go forward in time and space or teleport to different planets is literally it's so much cool. It's like it's a flight stick, really, from I would say a bomber, because it's one of those U ones, and you hold it on the either side, and you can let you push it back and forth, that sort of thing. It's a flight stick with a what's it called? A piece of metal from the stick handle all the way to the floor, and it feels like a little pressure plate with a wheel, and when you push it forwards, that makes the TARDIS travel. He falls on that, and then Barbara kind of gets stuck in this sort of adventure that they're on, and again, she's just there from start to finish. But I don't, again, makes sense because she got stuck there. She didn't want to go in the first place, but she just gets on with it. She just follows Granatava and Susan along for the journey, and Ian just does all the moaning, really. So that's sort of the main characters. Like, for me, Peter Cushing and Susan are the huge standouts here. As for sort of the Daleks, they are fun, interesting. I love the story here involving them and the Thals, Thal. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Again, like I said, I haven't watched much of the classic Who, like the original sort of William Hartnell, that sort of era of Doctor Who. So I don't really know much about their history in terms of how it links into the Daleks as well as the show. But to be honest, I think this film does a good enough job to really explain what happened. So to give you the long and short of it, the Daleks the people that were the Daleks and the Thralls, they went to war with each other, and through atomic war, because of the radiation, that there was mutations, and that to protect the people that eventually become the Daleks, to protect themselves from the radiation, they built battlesuits, which are the Daleks, which is the iconic look, right? They built them to kind of withstand it. Anybody else who couldn't get into one of those suits changed and evolved, and some evolved into hideous monsters, which you don't really see much of them, really. You see one of them that's been petrified, but apart from that, you don't really actually see any real sort of monsters, just a hint that they're there. But the Thals, they've changed and evolved to withstand the radiation, and you don't see them at first. You meet the Daleks first, and the Daleks are like, there are mutations out there are creatures out there that have evolved, that they're hideous, that they're disgusting, that they're hideous monsters. And when you first meet the Thals, you're like, oh, they look just like us. And then the Doctor gets to talking to him, and he goes, and they basically explain that the form of having 2 eyes, 2 hands, 5 fingers each, toes, like that sort of thing, bipedal, humanoid, was just a natural, organic sort of evolution to live and survive in this environment. And I won't go into specifics about the story and how they sort of connect to the story, because again, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I love their story between them, and how the Thals, they basically got to the point where they realized their mistakes of their ancestors of war and hate and destruction, that they're a complete peaceful race, that they want to trust the Daleks. They don't want to believe the Daleks are evil, and all they really want to do is work peace with the Daleks and to get help, because the Daleks have all the food and the resources. The Thals, not so much. They have some technology, but it's not really enough. They're starving, they're dying, and they want to get peace with the Daleks so they can get back to rebuilding Skaro, which they don't really call it Skaro, but if you know your lore, you know it is Skaro. And that's what they want. So they're a peaceful race. The Daleks being a very warlike race. They don't want peace. They just want to sort of kill all the Thals so they can take over and keep living and taking over and conquering as the Daleks do. So for somebody who is new to Doctor Who, who's new to the whole idea behind Daleks, it's a great introduction to the idea of who the Daleks are, what the Daleks want, and the lore around Skaro the Daleks. You don't see. I'm really bad at me. I'm forgetting his name. I can't believe it. Um, ah, Davros. That was it. I don't know why I was blanking. You don't see Davros in this. Davros is not hinting at. There's no mention of Davros. I don't know if it's because he wasn't thought yet or he was already in the show. I'm not really sure. But you don't see any sort of hint of Davros yet. There are no. There was another thing I was going to mention. There was no hints at obviously Gallifrey and Time Lord, anything like that. It's simply just a story with the Daleks and the Thals, and it's a pretty good story, very very interesting. So it does enough to kind of interest you and bring you into the whole idea of who the Daleks are and what the Daleks who are like what they are and what they're doing and that sort of thing. You even get a slight glimpse of actually what a Dalek looks like underneath the armor, which was quite cool, quite interesting to be honest. So there's that. Also, I love how the Doctor, as I mentioned earlier, he is a human. He's not a Time Lord. He's not a Gallifreyan. He's got one heart. He's just a human, who made a time machine in his garden, and he goes on adventures, or actually hasn't been on adventures yet. He basically made when the movie begins, he makes his final piece, and that's when Ian comes in. He shows him in the TARDIS. The Doctor fits this new unit. They were going to take it for a spin before the Doctor could put in any sort of location, sort of data where they want to go. Ian actually falls over, hits the thing, and they get traveled to Skaro, and the adventure begins. But I just love how he's a human, and that's kind of what Doctor Who originally was. I think I've mentioned this before in other times I've talked about Doctor Who. That Doctor Who originally was meant to be an educational tool. It was a way that the BBC could teach kids about science and history, but in a fun way, in a way that kids would find interesting. And I don't really. There is a quote by Terry Nation, but I don't know if by art, so I don't want to butcher it. But Terry Nation was one of the lead writers of Doctor Who, and he basically said that you should never talk down to a child. That you should never treat a child like a child. You should treat them like they have some sense, that they have a bit, that they know what's going on, that they're quite clever. And that if you try to strive for the best in children, if you show them the best in themselves and in the world, they will grow and hopefully strive to be better. And that idea fully transpired in the show, where like you try to show a Doctor that had issues, that had problems, but he was human, he wasn't alien, and that you could relate to him, which you still can relate to the Gallifreyan sort of Doctor, as I have and as many other fans have. But it was an education tool, and it was a way to teach kids, because he was a human. That's what he was. He was a human. Eventually, I think the idea was that he was a human from the far future, who had a time machine, and then eventually, as the series went on, and then we brought in Regeneration, and then the Gallifrey and Time Lords and all that sort of came into it. But originally, it was just like a man from the future who was a human, who built a time machine, and I like that. I like how the show, the movie sticks to that. They don't go full Gallifreyan. It is just a really clever bloke that's built a time machine in his garden, using the frame of a police box. I love it. Yes, he calls it a TARDIS, but it's not the TARDIS. But that's fine because it works the same, and it's fun. It's interesting. That's what it's meant to be. This is meant to be for kids at the end of the day. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be interesting. It's meant to pull you in and really sort of excite you and get you into this adventure. Like I said, and what, as I mentioned as well for the set design, the Doctor being a human really shows in the TARDIS interior how there are wires, how there are writing and things and like that on the wall. There are things going on that, yeah, it doesn't look alien. It just looks like he has built it in his garden, because he has. He's built it in his garden, but it works beautifully because he's a mad genius. So I love that. I really, really do. I love the extra bits of detail. So that is my sort of thoughts and feelings on the film. My overall sort of conclusion is that I'm really excited to see the next movie. To be honest, I wanted to watch it as soon as this film finished. I really wanted to sit and watch the second film, because I have the second film on 4K Ultra HD on DVD. So I really wanted to sit and watch it. I really, really wanted to. But I thought, no, I'll savor it. I'll savor that joy, and I'll wait for another time when I'm ready. But I will do as soon as possible, as soon as because I've got other things I want to review and talk about first. So I won't be looking at that yet. But that will be on my list, and I'll watch it as soon as I can, as soon as I'm free. But I just want to see more Peter Cushing. I want to see more of him. I want to see what happens next. I know the next story is another Dalek story, so I want to see how that works, how that adds into it, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. Again, and not I want to see more 60s science fiction. I want to watch. I'm in the mood for more 60s science fiction movies. It doesn't have to be Doctor Who, just very 60s B movie, A movie films. I'm gonna have a look, see if I can find some. I probably won't review them. I'll probably just watch them for my own enjoyment. But it just got me in the mood for more 60s funk, more 60s groove, more sort of just old fashioned timey wimey movies of that era. Like it doesn't have to be science fiction, but I'm kind of craving the old fashioned 60s flavor at the moment. So it's really got me in that sort of mood. The only real criticism I have about this movie, it's not really a criticism and it's not really a failing. It's just something that I want to mention, and I won't go into real specifics, but it's the ending of this. Now, again, the ending is not really any sort of spoilers, but I'm going to try my best to explain it in a way that if you're a Doctor Who fan, you'll understand, and if you're not a Doctor Who fan, you'll understand also. At the end of every episode of Doctor Who, you always have a moment where the Doctor will be with his companions, because the Doctor never stays for the big hurrah. He's not about sticking around and hogging all the glory, like, yeah, I saved the day, I saved your life, I saved your life. He's not there for the fame, for the glory. The Doctor comes, he helps people, he saves the day, and he leaves, right? He's not about the big glory, right? So, at the end of this movie, events happen, all is well, and the Doctor and his companions, they decide, okay, it's time to go back home. Now we've had our fun, had an adventure. It's time to go back home, where it's safe, right? And usually in the TV show, the Doctor would have a little moment between the companions. They might sort of have a conclusion, or they have a laugh, or some sort of joke, and they hop back in the TARDIS, and then the music starts. The Doctor music would stand, and and then it would end, right? In this, it's really confusing. Like, it feels like there was more there, but they decided just to cut it short. So basically, they're in the TARDIS, and the Doctor does what he does on the things. He goes, "It's all right, Ian. Considering you're the guy that got us here, I think it's up to you now who should take us home." So Ian goes, "Okay, no problem." He pushes the lever. The TARDIS does its thing. They all laugh, and Doctor's sitting in his little rocking chair. He's like, "Let's go then." So Ian goes to the doors. He opens the doors up, and what does he see? Roman legionnaires running towards the TARDIS. So he quickly closes them. He panics. He's like, "Oh God, no! Who?" Like it's a very comedic sort of thing. And again, Ian for this whole movie is just pure. He's just comedy. A lot of things he does is just for comedic effect. He falls over. He trips up. He hits himself. He walks into things. Apart as well as moaning, he's just there as a comic humor sort of person, right? So yeah, he sees the legionnaires. He quickly closes it. He goes, he runs away, and he's pressing all the buttons. He's freaking out, running around, and the Doctor and Susan and Barbara are looking at him like, what? Because again, they haven't seen what he's seeing. They're like, what? But they don't say it. There's that look of like confusion on his face, and then he turns around as he's pushing the lever back and forth more and more, and he just looks at the Doctor. He's like, "Well, you're not going to do anything," and that's it. It fades to black, and then the credits roll. And it feels like there was more to that scene, potentially. I don't know. Maybe it's in the special features, but it just feels like there was more to that scene. Generally, it fades to, like, Ian goes, "Are you going to do anything?" And the Doctor looks like, has that confused look on his face, fades to black, and I'm like, I feel like Woody in Toy Story 2 when he's watching Woody's Roundup, and he's like, okay, let's wait for the next episode. And then Sticky Pete comes over and he goes, show was cancelled after that. He's like, what do you mean? What happened to the next episode? We're going to find out about if he saved the critters or not. Well, the show was cancelled. Once Sputnik went up in the sky, all people wanted was space toys. And that's how I felt. I just felt the fact of like, yeah, okay, let's see the next episode. And then it gets poured into my legs. I'm like, oh, okay, that's how it ends. Bit odd. You know, I don't know. Maybe it was like they'd filmed more of that scene, and then they had to cut it because maybe the movie was going too long. I don't know. Again, maybe it's in the special features they explain it, but it's a very odd ending, very odd ending. Like if it's played for comedy, it's funny at first, and but until it actually ends, and then you're like, ha, oh, hold on a second, why are you ending now? You're ending too soon. You haven't. That's not how you end it. You know what I mean? So that was a bit of a bummer, to be honest. That's the only real issue I have with this film. Is just the end is abrupt. It's odd. Yes, the Doctor saved the day, but if you're going to end it, edit at that when they all jump back in the TARDIS and then end it there. Don't keep it going. Have that comedy moment. Ian freaking out, pushing buttons and trying to wiggle in the flight stick back and forth to make the TARDIS travel, and then him turn around saying to the Doctor, "You're not going to do nothing." And that's it. It just feels a bit like there was more there, or just feels odd. But that is the only real failing I have with this film. And again, it's not major, it's not huge. It might bother some people, it might not bother other people. It's just something that I wanted to mention because I just found it incredibly odd. But apart from that, overall, this movie's great. If you're a Doctor Who fan, watch it. You'll probably enjoy it, especially if you like the classic Doctor, and if you or the classic Doctors, or you like the classic series, or you just like old movies. Definitely time to give it a go. Like I said, I watched the 4K Ultra HD version from Studio Canal. You can pick it up on Amazon. That's like I'm not trying to advertise for it, but if you're interested, you can find it on Amazon. Just type in Doctor Who, Doctor Who and the Daleks, and you can probably find it there. You can get the sequel as well from Studio Canal, again 4K Ultra HD if you want to watch it there, or I think it might be on BritBox. I'm not sure, but if you are interested, definitely go look for it. It's quite easy to find now. It's definitely worth it. Really is. It's a lot of fun. Again, it's only short. It's an hour 22 minutes. It's not a long movie. It's not going to take you a lot of time. If you've got kids that like Doctor Who, get them into it. And if you just like Doctor Who yourself, then by all means. But that's my thoughts and feelings. That's what I thought about this wonderful movie. I hope you all sort of like this episode, like this journey into it. I feel like I want to do more, looking into more of the Doctor Who movies. I want to look into the sequel, and then I'm actually really looking forward to watching the Doctor Who movie with Paul McGann. Can't wait for that at all. So that should be fun. And yeah, so expect a lot more movies from me there. But if you like what you heard here today, you can find the Nerdstalgic podcast and more things from me basically anywhere and everywhere that you can find podcasts, really. Just go into Google, type in the Nerdstalgic podcast, and it will give you a huge list of places you can find me. The only place you won't find me is Apple Podcasts, but you can also find me on Audible and places like that. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. Put a comment underneath if you're a Doctor Who fan, or if you've watched this movie, or if you're interested in watching this movie. Most likely there'll be a pinned comment, so you can reply to that, or write your own comment underneath. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod for more Doctor Who things and other nerdy things I'll be talking about. If you listen to this on Spotify, again, don't forget to give a like. Don't forget to give me a star rating for 1 to 5 stars. 5 stars, best thing you heard in your life. You love Doctor Who, and you think, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm a huge fan, and you love Doctor Who, and woo! Or 1 star, you feel like I was speaking complete horse whittle, and that you're not a Doctor Who fan. Whatever you feel like is fair. 1 to 5 stars. It helps me out immensely. The more rating I get, the higher the rating, the more my podcast gets shown on Spotify. So it helps me out immensely. But that is everything. That is your lot. I am pooped out from at the moment because I've had a long day, but I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you listen to this at night, listening in the morning, listening to work, whatever happens, I hope you have a fantastic day. Hope you feel fantastic. Hope you are fantastic, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.